Hello, everybody. Yeah, this is the first part of our lesson 11, and it's all about the economics of the environment. And you might have noticed that one positive thing out of all this coronavirus outbreak has been the environment seems to be getting better, obviously, because it's not so much human activity. And as we'll see, as we look in the economics of the environment, there's a big link between the issues in the environment and human activity. And obviously, if there was no humans, the environment would be fine. But then obviously there would be no humans. So we can't say, let's just shut everything down and stuff like that, because it would be ridiculous. It would defeat the object. And so we're in the whole area of the economics of the environment, we realise we face trade-offs, and obviously trade-offs is something we looked at in the first semester in our second lesson, and very much the economics of the environment are all about trade-offs. Often the trade-off between a certain level of prosperity and a certain environmental standard. So we'll look at that. Okay, so I hope everyone's doing their homework 9. I believe that's due on Thursday night. Remember, tonight at midnight, the backpack assignments due in, and we need to do 1 question and 2 answers. And generally, I hope everyone's going okay. Remember, I'm there in my office hours from 5 to 6 every night. But no one really comes, so I'm assuming you're all okay. If you are struggling, please reach out to me before the end of the semester, so we can sort it out at this point. I'm very, very open to working things out if you're getting behind or something like that. Okay, so the economics of the environment. Let's see, let's share our screen. Here we are. And share. Oh, well done. Yeah, there we are. And start from the beginning. Yes, so here we are, the economics of environment, week 11, Jay Corgan. And so when we talk about the environment, I always like, obviously in a class, I like to discuss what people feel when I show you a slide like that. And I show you the words climate change. What does that make you feel? And probably you're in one of 3 groups. You could be, and I put this on the board, I could put it on this board here, but let's just sort of imagine it in our mind's eye. Either you are like really into the idea of climate change, you can see that it's happening, you can see it's doing real damage, and you can see that there needs to be serious activity to stop it happening. That's one. You're the sort of, you could say, you're a particular pole of this argument. Or you could be on the other extreme. It's not really happening. It's actually a hoax. Really, it's just a complete attempt to try and just stop the economy, and it's really just, it's not true at all. That could be, the other side. There's also a sort of middle ground, which is, climate change is happening, but it's probably not as bad as people say, or it's happening and I don't really care. I'm not going to change my lifestyle because of it. And that's the sort of middle ground. And you could be sort of on the, one extreme of that middle ground or the other extreme of that middle ground. And so, it's good to discuss those, it's good to think what you feel about these things. I believe climate change is real. I think, you can't really deny that, scientifically. I suppose you could argue that it's not caused by human activity, but that scientifically is a very, very wobbly ground. you could argue that there's not really much you can do about it, and we'll find some way of working it out when things get really bad. I tend to think that the Western world will find out a way of working it out when things get really bad for the Western world. But I would say that the big danger with climate change is it's doing incredible damage to the developing world, even as we speak, and it will do more and more damage. And I think that damage doesn't really need to occur. So that's my view on climate change. And I think things need to be done at this stage before there is real damage done to continents like Africa, to parts of Asia, and parts particularly of Northern South America and Central America. And I think there will be damage that will be very, very difficult to heal unless action is taken now. So that's just my view. I'm just telling you before I teach you all these things. So let's think about it. Like everything's about choices. Everything's about trade-offs. And the Earth is this wonderful resource. It's full of oxygen to breathe, it's full of water to drink, it's full of fossil fuels to mine, it's full of beautiful things, beautiful places to go, beautiful places to see, food that can be grown, all these wonderful, wonderful things that the Earth gives us, and the Earth has been giving that to the human race since the beginning of the human race, wherever you see that beginning. And for a long time, there hasn't been much tension between humanity and the environment. Now, if you look at this, it's a logarithmic scale, so it's all about changes in the rate of things, but don't worry too much about that. But here we're looking at the world's the world's GDP per capita, and if you look at it, it was staying pretty stable till about the 1500s. About 1500, it's very, very low. And now you're looking at a GDP per capita of GDP per capita of the average citizen of the world is $10,000 per year. That's what the sort of GDP they consume. In 1500, that was about $100, and by 1800, that may have been about $200, $300. But look what has happened since about 1800, since the Industrial Revolution. Since the rise of the scientific or the industrial age, basically the consumption, if you can think about this, the consumption of the average person has gone up by an enormous amount, probably since 1800 by 50 times. So from $200 per person to $10,000 per person. So the average person is consuming things that come from the environment at a rate of 50 times than that which they were doing in 1800. Now, that's part of the equation, but the other part is in 1800 the population of the Earth was 1 billion people. Now it's 7.7 billion people. So not only is the average person consuming much more, the mean average person on the Earth is consuming 50 times as much. There's also 7.7 times as many people. Let's say 8 times as many people. So with a rough back of the envelope calculation, means that is 8 times 50 is 400 times the imprint on the environment of the average of humanity has risen by 400 fold since 1800. And it's particularly risen since about 1950 and 1960. You know, the rise in population, the rise in consumption has been unprecedented in human history since about 1950 and 1960. And it's really been since that time that people have been saying, like, whoa, this is getting too much. And first it was the breaking of the ozone layer, then it was the, you know, thinking we were going to run out of food in the 70s, you know, ozone layers more in the 80s. And that, you know, and then now, you know, there's the whole idea of species dying off, you know, massive extinctions happening. But the big thing has been climate change. The big thing has been the, you know, the you know, looking at the whole idea of climate change. And that seems to be the big problem that's being caused by this, you know, rise in consumption and rise in people. And the, you know, the big thing with industrialization, one thing that really drove industrialization was the use of fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuels are anything that is really basically all this old fossilized trees and plants, you know, put into the Earth's crust, and over time the, you know, Earth grows over them. You know, I'm not a geologist, and you know, the pressure on them creates all this energy ultimately, and it can be in gas form, it can be in coal form, it can be in oil or petrol form. When I say gas, I mean natural gas. You know, obviously, when I say petrol, I mean gas, you know, that drives cars and stuff like that. And that has driven industrial growth. That has driven, you know, the prosperity, the consumption, the incredible society that we see today has been, you know, allowed to happen through the rise of fossil fuels. And, you know, there is this general feeling that, you know, fossil fuels are bad, you know, gas is bad, petrol's bad, you know, coal workers are often demonized as these sort of, you know, people living in the past and destroying the planet. But, you know, ultimately, you've got to be very, very thankful for fossil fuels. All the prosperity, all the health, all the wonderful life you can live today is down, you know, it's due to, you know, humankind's ability to use and utilize these fossil fuels. And, you know, there's a lot of them about. You know, we thought we were going to run out, but it just, they often seem to find new sources of these. And yeah, it probably will run out at one time, but it's certainly not going to be in our lifetime when this happens. And so fossil fuels, on the one hand, are very, very good. You know, it would be very easy to say, oh, fossil fuels are evil, we just need to get rid of them. But, you know, unfortunately, it is a trade-off. They give us a lot of wonderful things. And so, you know, as we say, from 1850, the Industrial Revolution started. But if you actually look at these figures, this is, you know, the CO2 emissions by world regions. So basically, one of the problems with burning of fossil fuels is it starts to put carbon into the atmosphere, and as more and more carbon comes into the atmosphere, carbon traps heat. That heat is trapped in the atmosphere, and that's been the problem. And obviously, it wasn't a problem in the late 19th century because there wasn't that much carbon being burnt. Even as we get up to sort of 1950, you know, still not that much carbon being burnt. You know, if you look at it, obviously Europe was the big burner of carbon. Europe and the USA. So the blue, you know, that sort of light blue there is the USA. The yellow is Europe. Europe's, you know, gone steadily up. The USA has gone steadily up since the 50s. You've seen other European countries, the Eastern European countries, Russia, burning more and more fossil fuel. And as you get into, say, I don't know, say in the 1970s, you were actually starting to see the developing world burn carbon. And obviously the red there is China. It wasn't very big till probably about even 1995, but it's got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, this darker red here is Asia and Pacific. This is like, Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, these sorts of countries burning more and more fossil fuels. You see India rising. Again, Africa, not so much. Middle East, not so much. But, really now you see China is probably on its own the biggest emitter. Obviously, the US is very big. South America, relatively small. Even the Middle East, relatively small. But you can just see, look, where in 1900 you might have had like about 3 billion tons of CO2 being pumped into the atmosphere. Now it's like 35 billion tons. And that is, carbon acts as a heat trap, and it's keeping heat within the world's sort of ecosystem, and causing the mean temperature of the world to rise. Now, if you look at CO2 emissions per capita, you see a great injustice, because as we'll see, that some of the effects of climate change affect different areas differently, and they particularly affect what is called the tropics, the area around the equator between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. That because they're, how would you say it? They're hotter, they're slightly more unstable sort of weather patterns, means that a rise of half a degree there causes much more of an effect of a rise of half a degree in the US or in Britain or somewhere where it's a sort of slightly colder environment. So ultimately what we're saying is that the countries near the tropics, which tend to be less developed countries, are being probably hit harder by climate change than the countries in the West, in Europe, the US, Canada, places like that. But if you actually look at the tons of CO2 per capita burnt in these countries, per person, you see a great injustice. You see countries like Angola, Congo, Mauritania, Morocco, Namibia, a lot of the African countries just having, such a small output of CO2 per capita, where you see other countries like France, United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, Australia. Look at the United States. United States is probably burning 20 times the CO2 per capita than someone with, in Angola. And probably Angola is actually, is not actually being affected. Angola is being much more affected by climate change than the US. And if you look at these countries with less than 0.4 tons per capita, Ethiopia, Equatorial Guinea, Kenya, Mali, Chad, Somalia, Chad and Somalia are really affected by climate change. Even as we speak, the mean temperature of these countries has gone up quite significantly, and it's affecting them. It's causing all sorts of effects on their economy and their social, their social life. The average citizen in the United States burns 40 times more tons per capita than they do. And so this is a thing of injustice. This is, one person gets all the goodies from burning fossil fuels, and another person has to have the effects when they didn't get any of the positive things from burning of fossil fuels. So though I say, yeah, fossil fuels are great, they've given us this wonderful lifestyle, there's a danger that someone else, people on other parts of the world, are suffering because of these fossil fuels we've burned, you know? So there's some real element of injustice in climate change. So make sure you understand sort of what's going on here, because it's very, very important to understand, you know, these things that are happening. I don't see China on here. So I don't, obviously China has a very, very big, very, very big population. So though they probably burn as much fossil fuels as the US, in terms of tons per capita, it's not going to be that big because they've got such a vast population. And, you know, it comes down to the question of how do we respond? You know, one of the reasons I got into the whole area of environmental economics, especially looking at the Sahel area of Africa. The Sahel is Sahelian countries are countries like Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, Chad, Niger, Sudan, Ethiopia to a certain extent, and Eritrea. And these countries have been very, very affected by climate change. Some people say, if you know, the reason there's all these migrants coming from the Sahel regions into Europe and drowning in the Mediterranean Sea is due to climate change. Some people say there are other reasons, and some people challenge that narrative. But I remember, you know, I spent a lot of time in Spain in between 2008 and 2011. I started to see these boats arrive. You know, you'd see drowned bodies on the beach, and you know, I was really wondering why this was happening. And you know, these are some of the first effects of climate change. Some people say there's a lot of conflict caused by climate change. Again, these are all these things are questioned and people debate them, but definitely, you know, climate change is having an effect, especially in Africa, and that's what I look at. And so us in the West, who are enjoying this wonderful life and are not really experiencing the effects of the what we'll look at on Thursday as you know, the externalities of all this wonderful life we're living and burning all these fossil fuels. How do we respond? How do we respond when we see people drowning in the Mediterranean? How do we respond when we, you know, we see that crops are failing in parts of Africa because of drought? How do we respond when we see the incredible deforestation in Indonesia and the effect that has on the agricultural life there? And, you know, it's a difficult one because let's look at, you know, we've had to shut down the economy for about a month, the world economy, because of coronavirus, and people are angry. And this will have a big effect on people's livelihoods and their jobs and stuff like that. And now we're saying, because of this, because of climate change, we've got to change our economy a bit. You know, maybe we can't live, you know, the wonderful consumption lifestyle that we live. And people just say, well, you know, we don't want to go there. And I believe that's a lot of the root of climate denial, is like, you know, you don't want to face the consequences of all these things because it could get worse. You know, these are boats full of thousands of people. What if they're tens of thousands? What if they're hundreds of thousands? What if they're millions of people? If you say, oh, the reason they're doing that is because we had this wonderful lifestyle, you know, you don't want to say that because you have to pick up the bill. And so, you know, this is a very, very sort of big thing, how we respond. And, you know, the whole question of the environment and climate change, are massive, massive philosophical issues. But what I'm going to do on Thursday is look at, you know, how as economists we can start thinking and conceiving these questions. And yeah, obviously this is the area that I'm very, very interested in. And yeah, this is, my big area. And so try and think about, okay, what can we do about climate change? What do you feel about it? And how can we practically think through ways of modeling this economically and coming to some sort of solution that works not only for people that are suffering from the direct effects of climate change, but for us in the Western world. Okay, I'm just going to leave you with one thought when it comes to the climate injustice. If you remember the song Despacito, I can't remember who sung it, but Despacito, that they say that the energy caused by downloads of the song Despacito, all the energy used in that was actually more than the energy used in 8 countries in that same period. Or and so you've got to realize that there's this enormous gap between the consumption that goes on in certain parts of the world and the consumption that goes on in other parts of the world. And just think, what does that mean? Morally, what does that mean economically? And on Thursday, we're going to think of certain models to sort of discuss this and think this through. Okay?